Hello, welcome Court Street family. So glad that you could join us today, whatever day you happen to be watching this. My name is Ashley Johnson. I am the producer here at Court Street, which, if you don't know what that means, don't feel too bad. It can be a little confusing of a title, but basically it means that I'm typically found behind the camera, not in front of it like today, or behind a computer editing what was on the camera. The last couple weeks, we have been talking about the Union Gospel Mission and Church at the Park here in Salem, which are both great ministries. But today, we're going to switch it up a little bit and talk about a group called Darian's Gift. Darian's Gift was founded back in 2010, I believe, by a Court Street family. And it's an organization that specializes in giving moments of joy to families who are going through treatment for childhood cancer. So it's a really great ministry. It is a great group who does some really wonderful things here in the community. And every year, they have a fundraiser that involves a golf tournament and a silent auction. And that's coming up here in the next couple weeks. We're sponsoring a tea there. If you want more information, go to their website. It's got some good information on it about that. One more thing before we get into worship today. A few weeks ago, we had our Youth Serve Camp, which is something that Pastor Mark has been doing for the last couple years. And it basically is taking the youth group, going out into the community, and helping different organizations or individuals who just need a little bit of assistance and doing some time of service. And then obviously at the end, they all get together and have a good time. I think volleyball and getting sunburned were the highlights this year, but I'll leave that to the video to show. Anyway, let's watch that video and then go into a time of worship.
Search the world, but it couldn't fill me. A man's empty praise and treasures of faith are never enough. Then you came along and you put me back together. And every desire is now satisfied here in your love. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing is better than you. I'm not afraid. to show you my weakness, my failures and faults. Lord, you've seen them all, and you still call me friend. 'Cause the God of the mountain is the God of the valley, and there's not a place your mercy and grace won't find me again. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing, nothing is better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing, nothing is better than you. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty to ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn graves into gardens. You turn songs into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing, nothing is better than you. It's true, you can believe it. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing, nothing is better than you.
slave is here to set the captives free. For who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is a lion, the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles, and every knee will bow before him. Our God is the lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chain, and every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Oh, every knee will bow before him. Who can stop the Lord Almighty? 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 Oh, who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Oh, who can stop the Lord? Our God is a lion, the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles, and every knee will bow before him. Our God is the lamb that was slain for the sin of the world. His blood breaks the chains, and every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Oh, every knee will bow before him.
Hey everybody, welcome. Pastor Corey here, and I want to take you back in time just a couple of weeks for me to an experience that I got to have. When I was out away from church for a bit, I got to spend some time in a place that I've always wanted to go. I got to be at Grand Teton National Park. In fact, I went on an extended tour across the country where I was van camping. Here's a picture of the van that I had a mattress in the back of and all my stuff. And to some of you, van camping probably sounds like paradise, and to others of you, it probably sounds like something else. For me, it was a mix of both. It was an absolutely soul-filling time, and there was a few points along the way where I was like, oh boy, the world got really small. But this is a park that I've always wanted to go to. I've craved going to the Grand Tetons really for the last 4 years since I got a glimpse of it in the distance on another road trip. And it was beyond my wildest dreams. The place, the landscape, the beauty of it, the majesty of it, it was just striking. And there was one night that I decided to splurge, and I paid for one of these wildlife tours. I mean, I was kind of agonizing about it, but I was like, man, I want the full experience. I want to hear an expert talk about the geology of this place and what's going on and the animals and how they're interacting with the landscape. And it did not disappoint. One of the highlights was getting to see some grizzly bears. In fact, here's another picture of the Grand Tetons here. They're just amazing. And here's another one that just kind of shows a picture from beside the road. You know, this is the kind of thing you just pull off and snap a picture with your phone and you get this kind of beauty in the park. It's just majestic. But these bears that I want to tell you about, there's been twice now that I've seen grizzly bears in the wild, and they just sort of blow my mind because the proportion of them, a full-grown adult, is so big that when I first see it, and everybody's pointing, there's a bear over there, there's a grizzly bear. I'm like, what? I don't see it. I just see like a big boulder kind of moving. Oh my gosh, that big boulder's a bear, and it's this great excitement. Well, the most famous grizzly bear in the entire world right now happens to be going between Grand Teton Park and Yellowstone Park, and her name, she's a mom to 4 cubs, is 399. Okay, here's a picture of her with her cubs. This is actually not this year. They've now grown a little bit, but she's very famous because she's an incredible mom. She somehow has raised these 4 cubs, got them through the winter. There's only 3 in this picture, but there's actually 4 through 2 winters now, and so she's just absolutely remarkable. Part of the way that she's gotten to this place of high survivability for her cubs is she knows that other males that are territorial, if they come around, will actually kill her cubs in order to breed with her. So she's figured something out. She's figured out, and this is the reason why she's the most photographed and famous bear in the world right now. She's realized that if she sticks kind of close to the roadways where people are, that the male bears will stay away and she can raise her bears in peace. So on this wildlife tour, our guide Maddie is telling us about stuff. We've all got our binoculars and we saw all these great things. And he tells us a story that he had with 399 here. He'd pulled up and he'd seen a bunch of people looking around, and he told all of the people in the tour bus, he said, everybody's staying here. He goes, I'm going to go out and find out where she is and we'll get a good viewing spot. So he jumps out, pulls out his binoculars, and he's looking around, looking through these things, and he hears something in front of him, and he just kind of keeps looking and trying to find what everybody's looking at, and then all of a sudden he lowers them all slow and dramatic and realizes that 399 is literally 10 feet in front of him eating berries off a bush. And he got real wide-eyed, and he crept back to the van and got in and told everybody, we're in for a real show. She's right over there. But it was one of these moments where these binoculars that he was looking for, they're great for looking at things temporarily through a distance, but you miss the big picture, don't you? And I want to use that image. I want that to really sink in for a conversation that we're going to share today about faith as it relates to fear and how fear relates to faith. We're going to work with these concepts today to see how God could integrate them in our lives in a way that would really release us to the most beautiful life that we can live. And I want you to hear this. Fear is a necessary emotion. It's something that is actually very helpful to us. It's like those binoculars. It temporarily helps us focus in on something that we really want to see. Usually, it's some type of a threat to us, and we need to give our attention for a few moments or a little while in order to move past the threat and survive. So fear has a very good dispensation in the world and in our lives. The difficulty with fear is when it lingers for a long time, or when we are really living and it feels like we're just in a perpetual state of fear. The last year and a half has caused all of us to take a long, slow bath in some really toxic things. The world's been full of anxiety. The world's been full of unrest. There's been so much uncertainty, and there has been so much fear, hasn't there? In fact, even now, as the pandemic seems to be winding down in most places, there's still this fear in the air. What about the Delta variant? What about the this? What about the that? And the fear is still present with us. So I want to look at what the effects of fear have on us and how they relate to faith. And I want to start with just this news flash for all of you. We're just going to have a mass confession here, a mass kind of confrontation even. I just want you to all understand this and even write it down. We all have fears, is the truth. Now, some of you might kind of cross your arms and kind of, I've faced all my fears years ago, or I ain't afraid of no man, or this kind of thing, or no bear even, Corey. I want to go give that bear a hug. Whatever it is, but I really want to invite you to a deeper place of self-awareness. We all know people who are terribly afraid of this or that, and we consider them unreasonable and this kind of deal, but all of us have very personal fears that are unique to us. Let's look at a definition of fear here. This just comes from the Oxford Dictionary. I actually really like this. I think it's a great definition. Fear is an unpleasant emotion, right? It really doesn't feel good to be afraid. And it's caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous and likely to cause pain or a threat somehow to us. So, What does that look like inside of your life? What are some of your fears? In fact, I want to invite you to take a moment to just really consider that. And if you have a piece of paper or you take notes in your phone or whatever, I would love for you to just consider it and write down very specifically what some of those are. And again, some of you might be kind of resistant to this. Well, I know a lot of people that they like to change the word fear into concern. Well, I'm not afraid, but I'm just concerned, you know. Well, those are things that probably qualify as fears. You're afraid, they represent a threat. You heard the definition, okay? Those are fears. Maybe some of you just say, well, I was just worried about so-and-so. I just worry about so-and-so and this kind of deal. Well, worries they fall under that definition of fear, don't they? If you're a person who feels like you're angry a lot, you're irritated a lot, I'm going to let you know a little secret that everybody else around you already knows. You have a lot of fear in you. If you're somebody also who has a lot of pride, I want you to know a little secret everybody else knows. You have a lot of insecurity and a lot of fear, and that's why you're projecting all that pride into the world. So if you're feeling really smug, you're feeling really angry, you've got concerns, worries, you have fears, take a moment to just name those. I'm going to keep talking just a little bit to help you see this and walk things in just closer and closer to your heart. You know, some of the fears that people have is we have a lot of fears of failing. We have a lot of fears of failing as parents, failing as workers, failing in relationships. We have very personal fears about being alone. We have fears about being a disappointment to somebody, fears of being abandoned. We have fears of being found out. Sometimes we're harboring a secret and we're desperately afraid that people will actually see us and find out about that, and the repercussions could be disastrous for us. And so we're living with this deep sense of fear. So, hopefully you've got a few of them that are written down. There's going to be some real beauty that happens from this. If you can acknowledge this and we can be honest before God and each other, we can invite God to touch these personal areas. And I think today we'll see a miracle where our fear could actually become something that produces faith. But before we get to that more, I want you to just understand a little bit about fear here. And so I'm going to put this chart up here. This is available online, by the way, so you can go find this all over our website or whatever, and it's on there. You can email us if you can't find it, and we'll get it to you. But here's the deal. When we're holding on to fear, and that's an important phrase, when we're holding on to fear and we're holding tight to it, there's a difference too. I want to make sure I make some clarifying statements and some compassionate statements about people who have clinical anxiety, or people who are suffering from post-traumatic stress, or who are suffering from whatever other conditions that we could talk about. This sermon will definitely have some good value to you, but I want you to understand when you're suffering from a brain condition or suffering from some trauma like that, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're just holding on to fear and you just need to let it go and quit your medication or quit this or do whatever. No, you need extra resources in that situation, and this will probably be helpful. I'm talking about those general fears that so many of us get haunted by. So here we go. What does holding on to fear do? Well, one of the things that it robs us of is it robs us of our vision. Like that binocular example, it causes our vision to shrink down where we're just focused on what we're afraid of, aren't we? When we're in the place of fear, it also, our fear craves certainty. We're longing for certainty, to know that the fear is not going to come true, or that it's going to pass, or what's the end result. And so there's this craving for certainty, and we'll actually sometimes regress from a more mature perspective on things to a more immature perspective, because we're just grasping at things to try and find certainty and to try and find a way to feel safe. It's a very understandable process, but it's about how we hold on to fear. The next one here that I'll draw your attention to is that holding on to fear causes us to resist reality. We're living, really, in another way to put this, is that it causes us to run from our past and we're projecting into our future, but we're resisting the reality that is right in front of us, looking us in the eye. And so we're either living in the past or we're living in the future, but fear takes us out of the present moment. You know, holding on to fear it actually puts us into this very controlling spot. We're desperate to have the certainty, to be able to control, to be able to guarantee our safety, to be able to guarantee the outcome that we're terrified of. It also puts us, this is really a concept that is rich even inside of churches. It's so easy for us as Christ followers to actually treat God in a superstitious way, where we're afraid of God. And we're holding him really at arm's length. And we get into what I call God appeasing, where it's like, well, I'm so afraid that God's going to take this away from me, or he's going to kill my kid if I don't do this, or blah, blah, blah. You know, we get all these fears that God's going to somehow mess with us, or he's just waiting with an itchy smite finger, to just come after us. And so we get superstitious about God. That's the place of fear. And we're trying to appease God to keep his wrath at bay. That's not the God that we're preaching about. That's not the God that's revealed in Jesus Christ. But as Christians, we fall into this trap oftentimes, but it sounds kind of good, how hard we're trying, but really it's a fearful place to be. The last thing I'll say about this as we're holding on to fear is it leads to something. The stream of fear in our life, as we hold on to it, it leads to things that are incredibly destructive, like shame. And it oftentimes leads to a very destructive anger. Anger towards ourselves, anger towards God, anger towards others. Fearful people become angry people, is the sad truth of it. So, here's a question that I want you to consider. This is crucial, all right? Where am I feeding my fear? You see, we kind of like it. It kind of gives us a thrill. It gives us a zing. It gives us something for our frantic mind to just keep mulling over and over again. Even when we go to sleep, we wake up and, I'm thinking of it again. It's consuming me. Sometimes we like it too because our fears, like I said, they lead to that anger. And anger feels like this very powerful emotion. And it feels very powerful to express it. And it's like we don't want to let go of our anger. And so we don't want to sometimes let go of our fear. And so where is it that you're feeding your fear? Where are you coddling it? Where are you encouraging it? Where are you nurturing it? Where are you participating and actually feeding it and keeping it present? One of the things that I'm passionate about, and I think is kind of an exciting and cool thing about the society that we live in, is I do have a passion for politics. I like politics. I also like civil engagement. What I don't like is I don't like political theater. And I also don't like uncivil disagreement. Those are things that feel very terrible to me, but we live in a society where we get to access some of that other stuff. And, one of the big things that's been occurring in the last years, there's been so much polarization politically and with people in our nation, and especially in the media. We see this polarization constantly. And I want to tell you about a little spiritual epiphany that God gave me through a little button on my remote control called the mute button, okay? God works in mysterious ways, huh, people? Well, I remember one day I was sitting and I was watching one of these cable news commentaries, and somebody's talking about this and this and this and this. And I'm just sitting there and I'm listening to it, and all of a sudden I just decided to hit the mute button, and I just started watching for the emotion and the character of the person who was talking and what was coming through. And I was surprised because I just experienced the person without the words going along in the context. I just experienced them as very, very angry and angry and angry. And I flipped to another channel, and the person talking just seemed very, very smug with the mute button on, and they just da-da-da-da-da. And other ones, they just seemed like they were poking at each other. And some of them just seemed really agitated and really haughty and all these kinds of things. And I suddenly just had this realization that this person that was speaking to me, and by the way, don't hear this as some condemnation of all media. We're having an adult conversation here. We can acknowledge the good and the bad, and everybody's job in the last year with everything that's happened has been difficult, especially news reporters and all of us, okay? But I just suddenly realized that I was filling my head and my experience with this person who was projecting all this anger, and these people who were projecting all this smugness and all of this divisiveness. And what I realized in that moment from hitting the mute button was that I was feeding anger in my life. I was feeding fear in my life. I was actually feeding pride in my life by listening to these people who maybe they had something good to say. In fact, they all do. They all have some good point. But the way they were going about it didn't feel and look like what the Bible talks about as fruits of the Spirit. The things we're created for, the things that give us life and give others life. It didn't feel like love. It didn't feel like joy. It didn't feel like peace, patience, kindness. It felt like none of that. It felt like the exact opposite. And here I was, gobbling it all up, feeding my fear, feeding my anger. So where is that for you? So we have our fears. We're all feeding our fears in some way. Let's get to the good stuff here. There's kind of a fun, dramatic moment coming here as we're building up in this here. So I'm excited about it. I want to talk about faith, okay? And let's look at a definition of faith. Instead of going to Oxford, which I looked at their definition, it was okay, but I had too many asterisks that I needed to say, but that. So I went to the scripture. Here's Hebrews chapter 11. I pulled a couple of scriptures together here to give us what I think is a pretty powerful look at what faith is. Here it goes. Faith is confidence in what we hope for. Confidence in what we're hoping for. And it's assurance about what we do not see. It goes beyond our ability to see. We're trusting in something. We have this confidence in something that we're hoping for. What is that? Who is that? Well, it's believing in God. It's believing that God exists and that He rewards those who earnestly seek Him. Now, I don't know about you, but this all sounds great for me right till this word right here. This is kind of a trigger word for me because it gets misused so much, I feel like, especially in Christian circles. And maybe you're thinking, well, rewards, that sounds great. So if I have some faith, then then God's going to give me $1 million or something. Probably not. That's really not how if He does, He'll probably then send a letter a little while after that says, go give it to these people that really offend you. So, it'll really grow your faith. But no, what this is about is God is relational. And so we're not signing up here to relate to God, and He's the great sugar daddy in the sky, and now we're all retired and on easy street because He's gonna just pay our way for everything. The reward of relationship is relationship. And so what it's saying is that we have this faith in this God who we don't see, but we see these things that are indicating His loving presence. We're believing that He exists and that He will engage with us, relate with us as we earnestly seek Him. And you may say, well, Corey, that's not enough. It actually is enough. I've lived 43 years of my life now, and I'll tell you this, the greatest reward in life is living the with God life. You're truly free then. In fact, let's look at what that actually, how that compares to holding on to fear versus living in faith. So check this out. When we hold on to fear, what does it do? It shrinks our vision, right? When we're living in faith, it actually expands our vision. And maybe some of you have some experience with people that are living in faith, but it actually feels like they're using the binoculars. They're just so focused on the future and heaven or the end times or getting off the planet or whatever it is that they're actually missing the big picture around them. Well, that's not a full picture of faith because faith expands our vision. We can see it all and we see what's going on. Faith also, rather than craving certainty, it allows us to embody paradox. Funky word there, right? What's that all about, Corey? Well, this paradox is where two things that seem like they don't fit, and we're not certain how they fit, they somehow exist together. The Bible talks about you and I, that we are both sinners and we are saints. There's this paradoxical nature to it that somehow we're being redeemed, we're growing, we're being set free, and yet we're still in this place of struggle in this life and living through sin. And so that's the paradox. And faith somehow allows us to not go, people don't just have to be one or the other, or this just doesn't have to be good or bad, but the things can come together and our soul grows big enough through our faith to contain both of them, just like God does. When you're in the place of fear, you resist reality. But the embrace of faith is to embrace reality. We can see it for what it actually is. That's where we have the freedom to truly be present. We're not just manically trying to plot against the future or getting triggered by the past, but we have the freedom to be truly present. So let's move on here with a couple of more. You remember that whole fear thing about being in control? Well, when we're living in faith, we're experiencing this liberation. There's this freedom. The future is full of possibilities because we're actually living in the present with God and others. We're writing new realities into the future. It's freeing. It's liberating. It's life-giving. It's wonderful. And how do we look at God? Is it this superstitious God that we're trying to somehow manipulate or trying to appease him because he's so angry? No. We don't have to fear him. We're living in faith, and there's this supernatural, this mystery of God actually partnering with us where we become so close that God's Spirit and our souls somehow merge, and we're living truly a life of faith. Lastly, what does it all add up to when you're living in the life of faith? Over here, fear leads to this shame and anger, terrible stuff. Well, living in faith leads to love. Love flows into us and it flows through us when we're trusting in God. And it leads to that blessed peace that the Bible says passes all understanding. We don't even understand it. We can't conceive it. It's a mystery. It's a God-level thing. But when we're living in the life of faith, somehow this love and this peace, it's flowing through us. And it's within us. And it's amazing. So, here's the beautiful thing. You see a chart like this, and you might be thinking, well, it's fear versus faith, and faith versus fear, and how do I, who's going to win? And we're going to get in this arm wrestling thing, and faith, and this kind of deal. The spiritual life is seldom about oppression and fighting like that. It's often that the most awkward, ugly parts of us somehow in God's hand get transformed into beauty, and that's true here. Here's what I want you to hear, is fear can actually grow my faith. Fear can actually grow your faith. But I just don't want to be afraid. I just don't want to be afraid anymore. Well, you can't really control some of that. But what you can do is you can take your fear, bring it to God in faith, and God can actually transform it into something that grows you, that grows your faith. Here's the crux, though. Here's the crux, and here's the question. This is something that Jesus often asked people, and even when it seemed like they were approaching him about something that was painfully obvious, a blind guy like, heal me, and he's like, well, what do you want? My eyes, this kind of deal. But it's really worth asking because you remember, we like our fears, don't we? They kind of become sometimes like a blanket, and our anger makes us feel real powerful and protected, so then we don't have to be afraid about people getting too close or whatever it is. So there's this beautiful part to our Heavenly Father that He doesn't force this on us. He looks at you and He looks at me and He says, do you want to get well? Do you want me to take your fear and transform it to grow your faith? If you want, God can do that miracle in us. As we're moving forward out of the pandemic, one of the great delights for me is seeing some of the old things that we got to do come back. And so it's like we're kind of getting to celebrate something new every couple of weeks. There was the celebration of getting to start in-person services again. And then there was the celebration when we no longer had to wear masks. They became optional for our in-person service. And there's all these other things that I'm just so excited to bring back. We have communion on Sundays in this room at these stations, and we've got this whole procedure to keep people safe. But it's just so wonderful to be able to be reintroduced to these things from a year of things getting smaller and the fear growing bigger. Now we're starting to add back in these wonderful touch points where we get to share faith and life with each other. And it's just wonderful. One of the things I was thinking of this last week as I was here was I'm so excited to reactivate some of our volunteers, to have people greeting people at the door eventually, and to have people praying with one another, activating our prayer team again, where during a service you can go and you can be prayed over. All that stuff is going to be such a delight as we welcome it more and more. One of the things that I'm getting super eager about, in fact, I'm kind of like getting just shaking like a runner about to jump into the blocks and get going, is our Kids Hope program You see, our Kids Hope program is our mentoring program through our local school where one person from the church meets with one student for 1 hour each week, and that program has just been amazing. And we'd grown it up to about 20 volunteers, so 20 people were meeting with 20 different students, and it was this great thing. And then when the pandemic hit and the schools shut down and all this stuff, it just was like it went into this place of just stasis. Nothing could happen for a little while, and it was just killing me. It was killing us. In fact, I finally started meeting with my mentee at a local park, and then he's like, can I bring a friend? And then that one wanted to bring a friend. Well, now Allison, my bride, and I, we have this group of almost 20 students that we meet with once a week, and it's honestly too big for me to handle. And I had this moment this last week where I was meeting with them, and I've just kind of been surveying them about how stuff went with school and everything. And I just decided to ask them this question. I was like, what's the most grade that you got this last term? The most of is what I said, So did you get, most of your grades were A's, most of them were B's, most of them were whatevers. You know what pretty much every single one of them said was most of their grades were F's. And that broke my heart. And honestly, it scared me a little bit. It activated this stuff that we've been talking about fear, because I love these kids. There's something so precious and so amazing from them. And I also know the statistics. I know the statistics that the numbers just, they don't lie, that if somebody fails a middle school math class, they have some astronomical rate that they won't graduate from high school. It's this terrible thing, but they can track it. They say, you got to succeed at some of this basic stuff here. If we don't, we lose the kids. And I'm looking at these 20 students that I just love and knowing that most of them failed. Let me tell you something, church. We are going to do something about that. We're not going to give in to fear. We're not going to give in to how bad it could be or how far they have to go or anything like this. We are going to find a way to move in faith. And I don't know what that's going to produce in their life, but I believe something is going to grow that God will work for good. Amen? As a leader in this church, one of the things that I find myself almost obstinate about sometimes is just my refusal to lead the church in fear. We don't legislate by fear. I don't beat you over the head with fearful things, shameful things. We are leading you in love. And that's a very different thing. It's a life-giving thing, and it's something that I consider to be very precious, and sometimes it can actually be unique in church work because it's much easier to motivate people and to keep people complying through fear, isn't it? But love is something better. Faith is something better that leads to something that can't be destroyed. So I want to make this personal. I want to bring this in for a landing, and I'll share a bit of my heart about how this journey of preparing this sermon, how God has worked it into my life, and maybe it'll be inspiring for you to kind of welcome God into your life in a fresh way as well. So there's a situation from my past where an extended family member just really tumbled down the rabbit hole of just doing incredibly deplorable and even illegal things. And as that situation unfolded for Allison and I, as we were looking at this and we were watching this, the tragedy just kind of kept developing these layers where other family members got sucked in to this. Other family members got affected by it. It affected us. And the really terrible thing was certain family members rallied around this person and really tried to insulate them from getting the help that they really needed. Ultimately, the situation escalated, and there was this trial. This family member was actually convicted. They're currently serving 25 years without the possibility of parole behind bars. And it was just this incredibly traumatic and terrible thing to live through. It was truly horrific. And it created all this tension in the family, which still exists to this day. It created all of this divisiveness. And this person who escalated in this terrible way, they just hurt all of us, especially my family, so badly. And it just happened that last week, even though the trial and the sentencing and all this is a few years back, every once in a while, the Court of Appeals will randomly just kind of release their verdict about some appeal that's been happened, and those things take like a full year or 2 years to work out. And so I'm just kind of going through my day, and all of a sudden I get this text from somebody who I have a relationship with that's working on this case, and they just said, "Hey, that appeals thing, it's done. It's going to get released tomorrow, and we'll find out what happens." Whoosh. We had fear lift off, like SpaceX, like, Falcon rocket taking off into the atmosphere. All of a sudden, all these fears are coming back to me. What if this person gets out? What if this happens? What if the appeal thing generates a new court? What if my family gets subpoenaed? We have to go through it all again, be around all these toxic people. And it was just this fear, just crucible that I was existing in for 24 hours as I was awaiting the news. And the next day we found out that the Court of Appeals had said all the lower court's decisions are affirmed, meaning this isn't going to go forward anymore. There's still other ways to appeal things, but at least that one came to an end. But even after that, and I got the good news, I still had this fear. And I still had this very thick anger of like, why are these people who have hurt me and hurt my family still able to be a threat? And I was angry. And I was fearful, and I was plotting, and what could I do, and how could I do this, and all this kind of stuff. And what actually interrupted the whole process was being a part of the sermon planning last week with Josh and Becca, and their message that they gave about the generosity of God, it shifted my perspective from becoming so narrow like this, and my fear, and how was I going to get through it. All of a sudden, I started to ease up, and I started to recognize the big picture. And I saw truly the benevolence and the love of God. And now, here's the terrifying thing that I just have to tell you, but this is reality, and we don't, sugarcoat this stuff here. The truth for me and the truth for you is all of our fears, well, maybe not the one about aliens landing and, doing something crazy or whatever. That one might not happen, but all of our fears actually could come true. And all that stuff that I was thinking of, the next appeal process, the next this, my family may be getting hurt again, all of this, it could happen. I didn't get this reassurance from God that, that's just never going to be, or that's just unrealistic. But what I got was I got a bigger vision. And I realized that my faith isn't in me being able to plot out how to circumnavigate my fear or to insulate myself from it. My faith is actually in God, who's benevolent, who's available, who will meet you and I right in the midst of our circumstances, and he will make a way forward for us. That's what we believe with all of our heart, is that our fears even, in the hands of this loving, benevolent God, who we have nothing to fear from him, in his hands, those fears can actually become fuel for our faith. Well, I want to say a blessing over you as we close out our time together today, and I'll remind you of just a couple of the things that we've said. That idea of how are you feeding your fear, and what are those fears? I just want you to really go back to that. If you wrote that down, I want you to look at it again for just a moment, and I just want you to consider saying a very simple prayer where you tell God that you're willing to trust him with these fears, and that you want to get well, and you want to trust him with all of it. If you have any doubts about God and his intentions and where he's coming from with all this, I'll read you a scripture. This is a few thousand years old. This comes from the Hebrew prophet Isaiah, and I want you to hear God's heartbeat for the people then, which is his heartbeat for people like you and me right now. Listen to this. Even if the mountains are shaken and the hills are removed. Hollywood's got this down. If the asteroid impacts the earth and the tsunami wave or the zombie apocalypse happens, this is, antiquity's version of Hollywood. If the apocalypse, all this crazy stuff happens, even if all that happens, God says this, my unfailing love for you will not be shaken, nor my covenant of peace with you be removed, says the Lord, who has compassion for you. He knows you're afraid. It's okay. Read what happened to Jesus the night before he went to the cross. He was afraid. He knew that something terrible was happening, and it wasn't a pleasant thing to live through. God knows he has compassion for you. Let's bring our fears to him, and let's let him transform them into faith. Amen? Bow your hearts with me in a word of prayer. Father, I just want to say to you once again that I trust you with my fear. My fear, honestly, God, my fears can be so overwhelming. They can be so personal. They can come on so suddenly that I really feel, can feel out of control. I can feel helpless, Lord. And that's where I need you, the God who is able to meet me in the midst of that and provide a way forward. Maybe some of the people who are listening to this right now, maybe they have some circumstances they're facing that seem impossible. There's no way out. All the fears are going to come true, and it's overwhelming. Lord, would you be the God that meets them in the impossible situation and makes a way forward for them? Would you bring peace and comfort right now in the midst of the turmoil? God, I also think of the person out there who's listening to this. Maybe they have an image of you that was more on the fear side of the chart. The image of you that you're a God who is superstitious and wants to mess with us and all of this kind of thing. And maybe today the fog of that started to clear and they began to see the beautiful God that you actually are, the God of compassion, eager to make peace, eager to make amends, eager to share in our sufferings even. And God, to you, we just say, yes. Yes, come into our life. Yes, take our personal fears. Yes, lead us on the journey of faith. And God, show us what's ours to do this very week to cooperate. Pray all this in the good name of Jesus Christ. If you agree with this prayer, wherever you are, say amen. Well, hey, it's always a delight to get to share these things with you. And I really appreciate you tuning in, being a part of our online services. If you ever do have the chance to make it to our in-person service, it's currently happening at 9:30 here at the church. I'd love to meet you face to face. And anyway, until that moment, until next week, God bless you, and I hope you have a great week.